The Nemef NF2 is a mid-security Dutch 6-pin tumbler lock, which was introduced in the early 2010s. At first glance, it's a seemingly boring pin tumbler lock with security drivers. However, several well-respected pickers claim that it is cursed. Let's take a closer look at this lock and see what makes it special. The Nemef NF2 has two types of security drivers: serrated drivers and spool drivers. Both of these drivers have tapered ends. This is the most common configuration of the drivers in which they alternate. What sets this lock apart and makes it fascinating from a mechanistic standpoint aren't its drivers, but rather its key pins. With most pin tumbler locks, the tip of the key pin rests on some piece of the warding, which limits its lower limit of travel. The NF2 has special warding in its pin chambers and key pins with a fat middle section. The warding limits the travel of the key pins and causes the resting position to be higher than usual. These are the 9 key pin types of the NF2 if they were at the shear line. This is where they would be in their resting position if they behave like regular key pins, resting on their pin tips. And this is where their actual resting position is because of their fat middle section that rests on that special warding. If we add in the driver pins, either the serrated or spooled, we can now see and analyze what is happening. The key pins can be broken up into 2 types, the long key pins and the short key pins. The 3 short key pins will start the drivers in their spooled or serrated section. The 6 long key pins will position both driver types in their tapered section when at rest. So the fat sections of the key pins force a majority of the drivers simultaneously into their tapered section. This is what leads to this lock's characteristic or cursed picking properties. Let's examine this in more detail. The unique key pins of the NF2 give this lock 4 phases of picking. To demonstrate these phases, we will be using the pins in the lock that I will be picking at the end of this video as an example. The first phase is picking the serrated pins to their tapered section. Remember, only the serrated drivers that are associated with the 3 shortest key pins will engage in their serrated section. In our example, this is pin stack number 4. These serrated pins are usually the first to bind, but 1 or more tapered drivers may need to be nudged in order for that serrated driver to bind. Once these serrated drivers with short key pins are picked, we enter phase 2, which is picking all the tapered ends. At this phase, all the drivers will have their tapered ends, highlighted in yellow, engaged, aside from the spool drivers associated with short key pins, which are highlighted in green. I go over in great detail how to pick these tapered drivers in my video number 23, the theory of picking tapered driver pins. However, in summary, there are 3 important tips for picking tapered drivers. Number 1, use heavy tension. 2, keep gently nudging each key pin up in small increments. The feedback for a binding pin is often very subtle and sometimes seemingly non-existent. And finally 3, watch out for oversetting pins. Once the tapered drivers are all set, the lock will enter a false set, which signifies phase 3, which is picking the spool drivers associated with short key pins. In our example, this is pin stack number 5, shown in green. When picking this spool driver, it will exhibit typical auto counter rotation before it is set. Once the spools are all picked, the lock will either open or go into phase 4, which is repicking any dropped tapered drivers. These are picked with the same principles as in phase 2. Alright, let's get to picking. Okay, so I'm going to be using a top of the keyway tensioner with tension in the counterclockwise direction and a Peterson hook 5 and 25 thousandths. On the left panel, we're going to have a camera that's facing the rear of the lock. The top right corner will show us the pins which are active in the current phase of picking, which will be labeled on the bottom. So phase 1 is picking the serrated driver in chamber 4, which will give us 2 clicks and bring us into phase 2, picking the tapered ends. In this phase, I crank up the tension and carefully nudge each pin just a little bit until it feels like it's no longer binding. Sometimes you're going to hear a big click and sometimes you won't. The clicks signify the pin's unbinding rather than being set. Often, the heavier the tension, the less times you need to pick the same pin over. There is a limit to this effect though. 5, 4, 3, click out of 2. That big click out of 1 and the false set signifies that all the taper ends are picked. At this point, I lighten up on the tension to pick the spool. Typical auto counter rotation occurs as the spool is set. Once the spool is set, some of the tapered drivers fall down and must be repicked. I once again crank up the tension and slowly nudge every pin until the lock is open. That's 5, 6, 5, 4, click, 3, 2, 1, click out of 1, another click, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and we're open. All right, let's get her out of the vise. So I don't actually have a key for this bitting, as I actually rearranged the pins of the two halves of the cylinder to allow me to demonstrate all the phases of this lock. I will have a link in the description below to my pick with the original key pin bitting. In that example, there are only 2 phases of picking, phases 2 and 3. Here's the plug of the lock. There's really nothing special about it. And the keyway. Gonna start pulling out the drivers. So I feel the important take-home message here is that if you know the mechanics of the lock, you break the curse. It behaves predictably and starts making sense. This is the housing. There's nothing really special about it. Gonna rearrange everything and make it look nice for you guys. And here's a close-up of all the pins. Well, I hope they enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you at the next one.